Listen carefully. Because if you are hearing this right now, there is a high chance something in your love life is not as random as you think. In the next few minutes, you might realize you were never confused. You were just never told the truth. Before we go deeper, take a second and subscribe to the channel and like this video. Not for me, but for yourself, because what you are about to understand can completely change the way you see women, dating, and even your own self-worth. Now let me ask you something directly. Have you ever felt like a woman is different with you compared to others, but you cannot explain why? One day she is warm, attentive, almost too interested, and the next day she becomes distant, controlled, unpredictable. And you start overthinking, replaying every message, every word, every silence. As a psychologist, I need you to understand something very important. Most men don't lose women because they are not good enough. They lose clarity. And confusion is the first emotional trap in modern dating dynamics. Because when a woman is emotionally invested, she doesn't always say it directly. She shows it. In patterns, in timing, in attention shifts, in how she reacts when you pull away slightly. But here is the part nobody explains to you. When you start noticing certain signs, you are no longer guessing. You are reading emotional truth. And the most dangerous moment for a man is not when she leaves. It is when she is still there, but you no longer feel secure in her behavior. That emotional instability you feel? That is information, not coincidence. I want you to slow down your mind right now. Stop trying to figure her out logically. Because female psychology is not always logical in expression. It is behavioral. It speaks in energy, attention, consistency, and withdrawal. And if you have been feeling confused, anxious, or overly attached recently, this is not weakness. This is your nervous system reacting to inconsistency. Right now, I want you to pay close attention, because this is where most men start misunderstanding everything. There are certain behaviors that women will never label for you. They will never sit down and say, "I am becoming emotionally attached to you." They won't announce when they start thinking about you more than they should. Instead, it leaks out through subtle shifts in behavior that most men either ignore or misread. And here is the first truth you need to accept. Consistency is louder than words. Not promises, not compliments, not emotional moments in isolation. Consistency. If a woman is interested in you on a deeper level, her presence in your life will not feel random. It will feel structured, even if it is subtle. She finds reasons to stay connected. She responds differently to you than she responds to others. Not necessarily faster, but more emotionally engaged. There is intention behind her communication. But when a man is emotionally attached, he often focuses on intensity instead of pattern. One deep conversation makes him think there is something real. One emotional moment makes him assume meaning, and that is where confusion begins. Let me slow this down for you. A sign is not one moment. A sign is repetition. If she checks in on you without needing a reason, if she remembers small details you didn't think mattered, if she re-engages after distance without awkwardness or explanation, these are not random acts. These are emotional indicators. But here is where it becomes psychologically complex. Because sometimes a woman can also withdraw, not because she lost interest, but because she is regulating emotional intensity. Yes, even attraction can trigger internal resistance, especially when she starts to feel too much too fast. And this is the part men misinterpret the most. They think distance always means disinterest. That is not always true. Sometimes distance is emotional processing, not emotional rejection. However, and I need you to hear this clearly, you are not supposed to live in uncertainty. Healthy interest does not keep you in constant confusion. Even when there is space, there is still a sense of connection that does not disappear. So the real question is not, does she like me? The real question is, do her patterns make me feel emotionally grounded or emotionally unstable? Because your nervous system does not lie to you. Even when your mind tries to justify her behavior, your emotional state is already responding to the truth. There is a moment that happens quietly, almost invisibly, when a woman starts to prioritize you without realizing she is doing it. And if you are not paying attention, you will miss it completely. I am not talking about obvious effort, not grand gestures, not dramatic expressions. I am talking about subtle shifts in attention that reveal where you stand in her internal world. Because when a woman is emotionally invested, you begin to exist in her decisions. She adjusts her schedule in small ways. She becomes more available than she is for others. Not always instantly, not in a desperate way, but in a way that feels intentional. You are no longer just someone she fits in, you become someone she makes space for. And most men overlook this because they are waiting for something louder, something undeniable. But emotional truth rarely arrives loudly. It builds quietly, in repeated behavior that feels almost natural. Let me make this even clearer. If she is busy, but still finds a way to respond to you meaningfully, that is not casual. If she circles back to conversations you had days ago, that is not random. If she brings up things you mentioned in passing, that is not accidental. That is attention. Focused attention. And attention is one of the most honest currencies in human connection. Now here is where it gets deeper, because this kind of behavior is not something she consciously plans. It is automatic. It happens because her mind has started assigning you importance. But here is the mistake men make. They test it too aggressively. They pull away completely. They become cold. They try to see what she does. And in doing that, they disrupt the very pattern they are trying to understand. You do not need to play games to read behavior. The pattern is already there if you are calm enough to observe it. And if you feel like she is investing her time, her attention, and her energy in a way that feels consistent, then you are not guessing anymore. You are witnessing emotional alignment. But I need to warn you about something, because not all attention is equal. And in the next part, you are going to understand the difference between attention that comes from curiosity and attention that comes from emotional attachment. Now listen closely, because this is where a lot of men get emotionally misled without even realizing it. Attention is not always attachment, and if you confuse the two, you will overestimate where you stand in someone's emotional world. There is a type of attention that is light, playful, and situational. She replies when she is bored. She engages when it is convenient. She enjoys the interaction, but she does not carry it with her when you are gone. This kind of attention feels good, but it does not create emotional depth. And then there is another kind, the kind that lingers. She is not just responding, she is remembering. She is not just engaging, she is initiating. There is a difference in emotional weight. You can feel it in the pauses, in the follow-ups, in how she reopens conversations without needing a trigger. But here is where it becomes psychologically important. A woman who is emotionally invested will not always be consistent in intensity, but she will be consistent in return. Even if she disappears for a while, she reappears in a way that reconnects rather than resets. There is continuity in her behavior, and continuity is something most men underestimate, because your mind wants certainty, it wants constant signals, but human emotion does not operate like a machine. It fluctuates, it breathes, it reacts to internal states. However, there is a difference between natural fluctuation and emotional instability. If she is genuinely interested, even her distance will feel connected. You will not feel erased. You will not feel replaced. There is still a thread between you, even in silence. But if you constantly feel like you have to restart the connection every time, like you are always reintroducing yourself into her attention, that is not emotional depth. That is emotional rotation. And I need you to be honest with yourself here, because many men confuse unpredictability with mystery and chase it harder, thinking it is attraction. But real emotional investment does not make you feel like you are guessing your place. It may not always be easy, but it is not confusing at its core. And this is where your awareness becomes your advantage, not by chasing harder, but by observing better. Because what I'm about to explain next will show you the first internal shift that happens in a woman when interest turns into emotional attachment. And it is not what most people think it is. This is where things get psychologically deeper, because real emotional attachment does not start with words. It starts with behavior she cannot fully control. When a woman begins to feel emotionally invested, her self-awareness around you changes. She starts to notice how she behaves in your presence. She becomes slightly more intentional, sometimes even a little more self-conscious. Not in a negative way, but in a way that signals you are no longer just another person in her environment. And here is something most men completely miss. She starts to calibrate her reactions around you. That means her humor shifts slightly. Her tone becomes more personal. She might tease you more, or she might become unexpectedly softer. These are not scripted behaviors. These are emotional adjustments happening in real time. Now pay attention to this part. When interest is casual, communication is functional. When interest deepens, communication becomes experiential. She is no longer just exchanging information with you. She is sharing moments with you. Even small things start to matter more. A simple "good morning" is no longer just a message. It becomes a signal of presence. A check-in becomes a feeling of connection rather than obligation. But here is the trap men fall into. They assume emotional attachment should always feel obvious. It doesn't. In fact, the deeper the feeling, the more controlled the expression can become, especially in the early stages. Because emotional investment creates internal tension. She likes you, but she is also observing herself liking you, and that creates subtle push and pull behavior. This is why sometimes she feels close, and then slightly distant, and then close again. But here is the key difference you must understand. A woman who is not emotionally invested will not care about how she appears to you. A woman who is becoming invested will start to care, even in small ways. Not because she is trying to impress you, but because your perception of her is starting to matter internally. And that is the shift most men never recognize in real time. They only see mixed signals, but what they are actually witnessing is emotional calibration. And if you are calm enough to observe instead of react, you will start to notice something powerful. Patterns replacing confusion. Now we enter one of the most revealing parts of human behavior. What happens when you are not present? Because attraction is not only measured in how she acts with you, but in what continues inside her mind after you are gone. When a woman has no emotional investment, you disappear from her attention the moment the interaction ends. There is no mental replay, no emotional residue, no curiosity pulling her back toward the conversation. But when attachment begins to form, something subtle changes. You start to occupy mental space without effort. She replays parts of your conversations. Not everything, but specific moments. A joke you made, a tone you used, a question you asked that stayed with her longer than expected. These fragments do not disappear easily because they were emotionally registered, not just processed. And this is where most men underestimate emotional psychology. You assume presence equals importance, but in reality, absence often reveals importance more clearly than presence does. If she brings you up naturally in unrelated conversations, if she references something you said days later, if she remembers details you didn't think were significant, these are not random memory traits. They are signs of emotional encoding. Now listen carefully. This does not mean obsession. It does not mean fantasy. It simply means you have crossed the threshold from interaction to emotional relevance. But here is where confusion can happen again. Some men experience this and immediately overinterpret it. They think memory equals commitment. It does not. Memory is the beginning of emotional attachment, not the conclusion. And this is why patience matters more than interpretation. Because at this stage, her mind is still evaluating you unconsciously. She is not making decisions yet. She is feeling patterns, not defining them. And if you react too strongly to early signs, you interrupt the natural development of connection. But if you stay grounded and observe, you will notice something very important. Emotional investment always leaves traces, even in silence. Now we reach something most men completely miss because it is not loud, not dramatic, and not easy to explain. It is the moment she starts changing her emotional boundaries around you. And this is important. Because boundaries are not just about saying yes or no. They are about how close someone allows you to get emotionally, how much access you have to their inner world, and how that access shifts over time. When interest is casual, her emotional boundaries stay rigid. You stay on the surface level. Conversations remain light, controlled, predictable. But when emotional attachment begins to form, those boundaries start to soften in specific ways. She shares slightly more than she used to. Not everything, not suddenly, but gradually. She reveals thoughts she doesn't usually express to others. She lets you see moods that are not always polished. There is a growing sense of emotional transparency. And here is the subtle part most men miss. She doesn't announce this shift. She doesn't say, "I am opening up to you." It just happens through repeated interactions where she feels increasingly comfortable being herself. Now listen carefully. This is not about oversharing or intensity. It is about authenticity. A woman who has no emotional interest will manage her image around you. A woman who is becoming emotionally attached will slowly stop managing every detail of that image. And this is where trust begins to form, even before labels exist. But here is where men often misinterpret things again. They think openness automatically means commitment. It does not. Openness is access, not permanence. However, access is still a very important signal, because people do not emotionally open up to those they feel nothing for. And there is another layer here. When emotional boundaries soften, she also becomes more sensitive to how you respond. Your reactions start to matter more, not because she is dependent on you, but because emotional safety is now part of the interaction. If you respond with calmness, consistency, and stability, the connection strengthens. If you respond with anxiety, pressure, or overinterpretation, she subtly pulls back. Not because she stopped caring, but because emotional balance gets disrupted. And this is why emotional intelligence matters more than emotional guessing. Because what you are building at this stage is not just attraction, it is emotional trust in motion. Now we are entering a stage that most men misunderstand completely because it is not visible in what she says. It is visible in what she does when you are not actively pulling her attention. This is where missing you starts to show itself, but not in the way movies taught you. A woman who is not emotionally invested does not feel your absence. She simply continues her routine. There is no internal disruption when you are gone. But when emotional attachment starts forming, absence creates subtle friction in her attention system. She reaches out for no strong reason. Not always with deep messages, sometimes with something simple, almost casual like a small check-in or a random thought. The message itself is not important. The timing is. Because it arrives when nothing forced it to arrive, and that is the key. When someone is emotionally neutral, communication is reactive. When someone is emotionally invested, communication becomes slightly proactive. Now listen carefully to this part. She may also start engaging in indirect connection, viewing your stories more consistently, reacting to small things she normally wouldn't, mentioning things you posted without you bringing them up first. These are not grand declarations of feeling. These are micro-signals of attention returning to you without external pressure. But here is where many men make a mistake. They assume missing always looks emotional or obvious. It doesn't. In reality, emotional missing often shows up as behavioral return, not emotional confession. She comes back into your space in small ways because your absence is registering internally. Not as panic, not as desperation, but as awareness. And I need you to understand something very clearly here. This does not guarantee love. It does not guarantee commitment. It simply indicates emotional presence in her mental space. But that alone is significant, because people do not return mentally to those who meant nothing to them. However, the real psychological insight is this. If she feels your absence too strongly, too early, too often, without emotional stability in the connection, she may also create distance to regulate that feeling. So you are not just observing missing, you are observing balance. Now we're getting into something men almost never get explained correctly, because it doesn't look like attraction on the surface. It looks like confusion, timing games, and emotional unpredictability. But psychologically, it is something else entirely. It is testing. Not manipulation in the dramatic sense people online talk about, but a natural human behavior where emotional investment is being measured unconsciously. When a woman starts to feel something real, she doesn't just move forward blindly. She observes how stable you are when things are not perfectly smooth. So you might notice small shifts. She takes slightly longer to reply sometimes, even though she is active. She becomes warmer again after a short distance. She changes her energy without explanation, and you are left trying to decode what changed. But the mistake is thinking this is random, because what she is actually observing is not your reaction to her best behavior, but your emotional stability during inconsistency. Now listen closely. If you become anxious, reactive, or start over-chasing during those shifts, she registers that. Not consciously like a checklist, but emotionally as instability. If you stay calm, consistent, and unaffected, she registers that too. And this is where attraction either stabilizes or weakens. Because emotional safety is not built when everything is perfect. It is built when unpredictability does not break your center. But here is where men misinterpret this completely. They think they are being tested in a game-like way. In reality, she is not trying to confuse you. She is observing how your emotional system behaves under pressure. And pressure can be very subtle. It is not always silence or distance. Sometimes it is small shifts in attention that force your mind to fill in gaps. Now I want you to understand something important. A woman who is not interested does not test. She disengages. Testing is not absence of interest, it is uncertainty inside interest. But here is the danger. If you start reacting too strongly to every shift, you create the very instability she is unconsciously trying to evaluate. And if you remain grounded, you communicate something far more powerful than words ever could: emotional control. Now we reach the point where everything becomes clearer. Not because she suddenly explains it, but because her behavior stops feeling random. This is the moment where intention begins to replace uncertainty. When a woman is not emotionally invested, her presence in your life feels scattered. You do not feel a consistent direction in the connection. You feel like you are restarting emotionally every time you engage. But when emotional attachment becomes real, something shifts quietly. Her behavior starts to have continuity. You notice she doesn't just appear anymore, she returns with context. She continues conversations instead of resetting them. She refers back to shared moments without being prompted. There is a sense that you are building something, even if nothing has been labeled yet. And this is where many men finally start feeling secure again. But they still misunderstand why. Because they think clarity comes from intensity. It doesn't. Clarity comes from pattern stability. Now listen carefully. One of the strongest signs you are no longer dealing with casual interest is when she starts integrating you into her daily emotional rhythm. Not her entire life, but her mental flow. She thinks in connection to you. She associates moments in her day with things she wants to share with you later. She doesn't force it. It happens naturally. And you will feel it in how she engages. There is less emotional randomness, less uncertainty in tone. Even when she is busy, there is a sense that the connection still exists in the background. But here is the final truth most men miss. This stage still requires balance, because even real emotional attachment does not automatically equal commitment. It simply means you have moved from option to emotional relevance. And emotional relevance is powerful, but it is not final destination. What matters now is not chasing more signs, but understanding what you are actually building with her behavior over time. Because if it is real, it will stabilize. If it is not, it will eventually fade without explanation. Now I want you to see the full picture, because if you only take fragments of what I've said, you will misunderstand everything again. Real attraction is not a single sign. It is not a message, not a look, not a moment of attention, not even a strong emotional exchange. Real attraction is a pattern that holds itself together over time without constant forcing. And if you remember only one thing from everything I've told you, let it be this. Clarity does not come from intensity, it comes from consistency. Because intensity can be emotional curiosity, boredom, validation-seeking, or temporary excitement. But consistency reveals something deeper. It shows where someone naturally returns when they are not trying to impress, perform, or escape. Now listen carefully. If a woman is genuinely emotionally invested in you, you will notice 3 things over time. First, you will not feel like you are constantly restarting the connection. Second, you will not feel emotionally erased after distance. And third, you will feel a sense of continuity in how she engages with you, even when life gets busy. But if you are constantly confused, constantly trying to interpret shifts, constantly wondering where you stand, that confusion is not something you are supposed to solve. It is information. Because emotional safety is not built in uncertainty, and I need you to understand something very important here. This is not about controlling her behavior. This is not about playing psychological games. This is about understanding human attachment, so you stop mislabeling confusion as connection and connection as confusion. Because the real danger for men is not rejection, it is staying emotionally attached to something that never stabilizes. And once you see that clearly, you stop chasing signs and start observing patterns. You stop overreacting to moments and start respecting consistency. You stop guessing your worth in someone's behavior and start paying attention to how that behavior makes you feel over time. Calm or unstable, grounded or anxious, secure or uncertain. Your nervous system already knows the answer before your mind accepts it. So the final truth is simple. If it is real, it becomes clearer with time. If it is not, it becomes more confusing with time. And now the choice is no longer about decoding her. It is about trusting what your experience has been telling you all along.